During the whole of a dull, dark, and soundless day in the autumn of the year, when the clouds hung oppressively low in the heavens, I had been passing alone on horseback through a singularly dreary tract of country, and at length found myself, as the shades of the evening drew on, within view of the melancholy House of Usher. I know not how it was, but with the first glimpse of the building, a sense of insufferable gloom pervaded my spirit. I say insufferable, for the feeling was unrelieved by any of that half-pleasurable poetic sentiment with which the mind usually receives even the sternest natural images of the desolate or terrible. I looked upon the scene before me, upon the mere house, and the simple landscape features of the domain, upon the bleak walls, upon the vacant eye-like windows, upon a few rank sedges, and upon a few white trunks of decayed trees, with an utter depression of soul which I can compare to no earthly sensation more properly than to the after-dream of the reveler upon opium, the bitter lapse into everyday life, the hideous dropping off of the veil. There was an iciness, a sinking, a sickening of the heart, an unredeemed dreariness of thought of which no goading of the imagination can torture into aught of the sublime. What was it? I paused to think. What was it that so unnerved me in the contemplation of the House of Usher? It was a mystery all insoluble, nor could I grapple with the shadowy fancies that crowded upon me as I pondered. I was forced to fall back upon the unsatisfactory conclusion that while, beyond doubt, there are combinations of very simple natural objects which have the power of thus affecting us, still the analysis of this power lies among considerations beyond our depth. It was possible, I reflected, that a mere different arrangement of the particulars of the scene, of the details of the picture, would be sufficient to modify or perhaps to annihilate its capacity for sorrowful impression. And acting upon this idea, I reined my horse to the precipitous brink of a black and lurid tarn that lay in unruffled luster by the dwelling, and gazed down, but with a shudder even more thrilling than before, upon the remodeled and inverted images of the grey sedge, the ghastly tree stems, and the vacant and eye-like windows. Nevertheless, in this mansion of gloom I now proposed to myself a sojourn of some weeks. Its proprietor, Roderick Usher, had been one of my boon companions in boyhood, but many years had elapsed since our last meeting. A letter, however, had lately reached me in the distant part of the country, a letter from him, which, in its wildly importunate nature, had admitted of no other than a personal reply. The master gave evidence of nervous agitation. The writer spoke of acute bodily illness, of a mental disorder which oppressed him, and of an earnest desire to see me, as his best, and indeed his only personal friend, with a view of attempting, by the cheerfulness of my society, some alleviation of his malady. It was the manner in which all this, and much more, was said, in the apparent heart that went with his request, which allowed me no room for hesitation, and I accordingly obeyed forthwith what I still considered a very singular summons. Well, I've always liked Edgar Allan Poe. I've read all of his stories, his poems. The Raven is one of my favorite. His other short stories, The Pit and the Pendulum, the Telltale Heart, all of his stories have kind of appealed to me. Its melancholy nature, its classic horror. As growing up, I've kind of read him in different ways too. I've seen the movies, I've seen comic books of these stories, and so they've always grasped my imagination. Well, I think all works lend themselves to adaptation for the stage. I have adapted a lot of stories, short stories, poems for the stage, anything from Dr. Seuss to Yellow Wallpaper by Gilman, and even stories and poems about 9/11. So I've adapted a lot of things for the stage. Now, for musicals, there's a saying in Broadway that any story can be adapted to a musical, as they've tried to prove these past couple of years. I just thought this would be a great story to adapt for a musical. The play that I adapted, though, wasn't a musical, although it did have music in it. We actually gave music to one of Poe's stories or poems, and then put that in the play for a silent scene with music, and it worked very well. As for why I feel that this work lends itself well to adaptation, I couldn't tell you. I just thought it did because I liked the play. Not really. The Tarn on stage, yes, it is sort of like a character that is part of the story and of the play it's as well. But when we did it, when we put it on stage, we just did it with light, it's like a faint red and green glow from below, shining up on the actor when he did his monologue, and the main character was Edgar. We called it Edgar because Edgar Allan Poe, but he actually said these monologues at the beginning, and in fact the whole play is like a monologue. So whenever he was speaking to the audience, we just put this red and green glow up from below, and that indicated the Tarn. And then we did lights at the end when the fall of the House of Usher happens, when it collapses. We intermingled those lights in the whole stage, as if the Tarn took over the whole house. So we handled it through lighting. I think the character that I would expand most upon would be Madeline Usher. Maybe through flashbacks, but even during the story of her death and her rising and her being put in the tomb, I think that character, more than any of the others, would lend itself more to being expanded upon. Growing up on the farm, we didn't have TV. We had radio, and we had books, lots of books. And there was this small little book about 2 inches by 2 inches that had some of the collected short stories of Edgar Allan Poe. And within that book, there were drawings. And believe it or not, my brother read to me one of these stories that he liked. And so I started looking at the book, looking at the drawings, and then reading the captions under those drawings, and then reading the whole stories. And that's kind of what drew me to Edgar Allan Poe's work initially. It was my brothers and sisters that actually drew me to it, because they read the stuff, and then being the younger brother, I read the stuff.